Hello YouTube, this is Nebutron and today I'm going to take a retrospective look at Jumper. If it's your first time here, you are most welcome. I am brand new, or rather this channel is brand new, and my thing is television, cinema and video games, so if you like those things, you're in the right place, even if you thought you were lost. Normally this is where I say there are spoilers and to give fair warning, so I'm going to do that. There are spoilers in this review, but also this is an old movie and I do expect most of you to have seen it. And I can't remember if I saw this in the cinema. I think I did. Honestly, I hope I did, because the one thing I remember thinking about this movie is that it was just cool. It was a fun time. It had cool visual effects and set pieces, cool sound design. The story was okay. It definitely wasn't a masterpiece, but look, very few movies are without shortcomings. My overall feeling was that watching Jumper was a fun time to be had. So the point of this was to go back and see if those initial impressions held up, and they don't. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't terrible. Actually, I think visually it's still a really impressive movie, but the writing is definitely a letdown, and the early parts of the movie are extremely cringy.
It wasn't always like this. Once I was a normal person. A chump, just like you.
Yeah, but let's get into it. The story is about David Rice, self-proclaimed chump, according to his adult self, and we see his teenage self hopelessly trying to talk to his crush Millie. He gives her a snow globe, but there's a bully who is just unreasonably mean, really. So, you know, the usual stuff. Anyway, this bully throws the snow globe onto a frozen lake, and of course David bravely goes out to collect it before falling in and drowning to his death. Or that's what would happen, but the stress of it all leads to his first teleport, which I refer to as jumping from here on out because it sounds cooler, and as we'll learn, David is in fact a jumper, and that's how they refer to it in the movie. So we see him learn about his new power in what is a pretty cliche way, I'll admit. It's a classic hero tries out their power through trial and error montage thing. We learn that David's mother left the family when he was really young, and that his father is a drunkard and abusive. So upon learning he can go anywhere he wants, it's not really a surprise that David doesn't choose to stick around. But before making this decision, he leaves the snow globe he was supposed to give to Millie on a swing outside her home so she doesn't think he's dead, which is nice I guess, even though she's probably going to be called crazy for insisting he's alive for the next 8 years. David then decides that he's effectively going to drop out of school and rob a bank, basically saying you can't blame him because he was 15. Now I don't know, I'm not entirely sure my go-to would be to rob a bank at 15 years old. I was way too conscious of the far-reaching and oppressive nature of authority at that age. David proceeds to make multiple jumps in and out of a bank, amassing literal bags of cash. It's a little ridiculous to be honest with you, and isn't all that cash marked? Like surely once the bank realizes, wouldn't they be able to trace it? I don't know, all my knowledge on marked bills comes from Hollywood anyway. This is where Roland first appears, played by Samuel L. Jackson.
The police and the FBI have already been through here. Who are you with? NSA.
Yeah, that's totally made up. I find Jackson is in his element in these movies. He has a good time and you can count on a good performance. Here he plays a murderous fanatic, so you kind of know you're in for a fun ride. So this part serves as the prologue, and Hayden Christensen narrates the whole section to bring us up to speed, but it sounds so cringy. The problem with it is that this movie came out in 2008, a few years after the last of the Star Wars prequel trilogy, where just about everyone had decided he was a pretty annoying and awful Anakin.
I don't want to hear any more about Obi-Wan. Don't you turn against me.
Nowadays, I think that idea of Hayden has died down a bunch, but for a while it was difficult to separate Hayden from Anakin, and in this early section, it's basically Anakin Skywalker arrogantly talking about how cool he is because he used his unique ability to instantaneously travel through physical space at will to become a multimillionaire and hardened criminal. There really is no reason to like this guy. Anyway, this is the setup to bring us to the current day. David is living in an expensive penthouse apartment which is dotted with hundreds of pictures of locations around the world that act as jump sites for him. He decides to head out to London on a whim and chats up a model, but he draws the attention from Griffin, another jumper we'll learn later, who realizes what David's abilities are and starts to track him. It turns out Roland is also tracking him and ambushes David in his home, making it clear things aren't going to be rosy from here on out. He tries to kill David while chatting about consequences, and we know Roland is about this life because we've seen in a short scene just before this him kill another jumper. David is totally shaken and just about manages to get away. And what does David do? All of a sudden he remembers his crush and decides to reappear in her life out of the blue and ask her to follow him to Rome. This is a super entitled and also wildly reckless thing to do after discovering there's a murderous zealot who has been tracking you for 8 years. David also decides to jump his old bully Mark, into what I think is the same bank he robbed years ago, which is just really stupid. Anyway, David and Millie fly off to Rome, which to be fair must be torture for David given that the flight is 10 hours long. Meanwhile, Roland is able to hijack Mark's interrogation by hilariously knocking out a cop in a station with zero repercussions, even though he has no federal warrant, because it's the movies. And back to Rome. Well, that moved fast. David is basically busy now stringing Millie into his illegal activities, even though he is low on cash, for a millionaire at least, and being hunted by zealots. David and Millie break into the Colosseum in Rome to look around, but so do more of Roland's buddies who have finally found him. Luckily for David, Griffin, played by Jamie Bell, decides to show himself and simultaneously reveals that there are more jumpers like the two of them, and that the crazy murdering zealots are called paladins. There is a skirmish and they get away, but as they make their escape, David and Millie are arrested by the Italian police for trespassing. Naturally, Millie is a little concerned. David is detained for some time and isn't jumping in an effort to keep a low profile. Then his mother shows up out of nowhere for the first time since he was 5 to buy him some time before just leaving, while telling him to ditch the girl, which seems wild to me. David leaves the station with Millie and decides for her safety, it's best to send her away on a flight home rather than, tell her the truth. David then ends up running into Griffin and manages to follow him through a jump using his jump scar, which is kind of like the after effect when a jumper actually makes a jump, the kind of residue, I guess, they leave behind. I don't know. It's kind of a cool concept. David discovers that Griffin has been tracking and killing paladins from a secret lair, so he tries to convince Griffin that teaming up to take down Roland is probably a good idea. Griffin doesn't agree, so David decides to stalk him until he changes his mind, because what are boundaries to a jumper? They traipse around the world for a bit before Griffin really drives home the point that paladins are murderers who will kill anyone in their way in order to get to jumpers, including loved ones. David realizes his dad is in danger and jumps home to find him bleeding out after a visit from Roland. He jumps into a hospital and realizes that Millie, who's on a plane back from Rome, will be the next target, and finally manages to convince Griffin to help him. But before that, he somehow finds Mark, who he teleported to the bank he robbed from, and then blames him for talking as if he was supposed to be loyal to David. David is really dumb. David arrives at the airport to meet Millie, but realizes he's late. He jumps to her home in order to get her to safety, but understandably, she's a little pissed, and so she refuses, all while Roland pulls up outside and starts to make his way in. David quickly jumps around, showing Millie his ability in the worst way possible.
This might hurt a little bit, okay?
Like, that's gonna convince her, right? Anyway, David jumps with Millie to Griffin's lair, just as Roland and his goons launch a full-scale attack. David thinks he's protected Millie, but Roland uses a machine to keep his jump scar open and pass through the jump stream. So David, being David, has effectively led the paladins back to Griffin's lair, undoing years of hard work. A pissed off Griffin tussles with Roland and actually manages to defeat him, forcing Roland back through the open jump stream, but he manages to pull Millie through with him. David obviously wants to go through and save Millie, but Griffin is completely disinterested and it's all about making sacrifices, which is a little cold-blooded, but I kinda respected it. Then he reveals he plans to drop a literal bomb in the home and blow everyone up, which I'll admit is where he lost me. That's a bit extreme. This leads to a tussle between David and Griffin, which David ultimately wins before heading back to save Millie, which of course is obviously a trap, but a very cool scene ensues in which David manages to jump the corner of the entire building before then jumping Roland to a cavern in Horseshoe Bend, Colorado, choosing to let him live, which is probably dumb given just how hungry for blood this guy is. But I guess it was smart at the time when you're hopeful for sequels. We do get a little epilogue, which is honestly incredibly unsatisfying. David basically confronts his mother, who does insist that she abandoned him in order to protect him, but then basically says that since she's a paladin, she still has to kill him. However, he can have a head start because she loves him, even though she's still gonna have to kill him, probably. Really weird scene. And that's where the movie ends. Ultimately, this is definitely worse than I remember it, but I still think it had a ton of potential and it still looks impressive to this day. To be honest, Doug Liman is a great director who was at the helm of The Bourne Identity, which of course is a trilogy more associated with Paul Greengrass these days, but the pace there was set definitely by Liman. I still think Jumper could have led to a decent series. They could have explored more behind Paladins and taking a look at their history. and how they became the force they are, because they clearly have a ton of resources. They definitely could have explored more jumpers, because we see no female jumpers or really any jumper whose personality isn't a stunted mess. Both David and Griffin are really unlikable characters, and the film doesn't really do much to develop them at all, other than to reveal that they both have issues stemming from growing up without parents. And it's worse in David's case because he's not very interesting, he isn't very likable by the end, he's naive, reckless and selfish for the entirety, and you don't finish the movie caring about him. But there are certain concepts around the abilities that I did find interesting, like the age of your first jump, indicating your aptitude for the ability, or being able to natively follow jumpers through jump scars, or perhaps how Griffin has developed his ability enough to move very large objects with enough momentum. That being said, I have to say it's kind of ridiculous that Griffin has been hunting paladins for years but doesn't wear some kind of non-conducting armor to prevent their weapons from hurting him. Ultimately, Jumper is poorly written and the characters are half-baked, underdeveloped and unlikable. The visual effects are cool, teleportation in cinema usually does look nice, and for me, Jumper is still one of the best depictions of teleportation in cinema. Unfortunately, this doesn't help the movie enough and it ends up being a missed opportunity. In this retrospective look, I give Jumper a 2 out of 5. Thank you for sticking with me to the end. It was fun to revisit Jumper and interesting to see just how wrong I was about how good I thought it was originally. Have you watched Jumper recently? What did you think? Is it worse or better than you remember? Let's have a discussion in the comments below. If you enjoyed the review, give me a like. If you enjoy my content, don't forget to subscribe. I have more views on the way, but until next time, I'm out.